Alright, how's it going everyone, and welcome to another video. Now, in the past couple of days, Capcom has released a lot of information about the new Monster Hunter Wilds game. Personally, for me, I've only recently become a fan, having played Rise just recently and going back to playing Worlds. I actually really have been enjoying these games for what they are, and I've started to get really hyped for Wilds, right? But Capcom just released the PC requirements for running this game, and I gotta say this, I am absolutely shocked. And it's not even the specific requirements that they're saying, like the actual hardware itself, but mainly the fact that they're mandating frame generation to run their games at recommended settings. So let's go quickly over it. So recommended specs, right? 11600K or 12400F or 3600X for the AMD side. Very typical stuff. This is pretty mainstream specs for the most part. You got 16 gigs of RAM and a 2070 Super or 4060, right? These are pretty common GPUs. In fact, the 3060 is the most popular Steam GPU, and the 4060 is not too far ahead of it, so it's very comparable. But large storage requirement aside, the little note down there is like the most crazy thing for me, right? So take a look at this, right? This game is expected to run at 1080p 60 FPS under the medium graphics setting with frame generation. Are you kidding me? Frame generation needs to be enabled in order to run this game at 60 FPS? The 4060 is a relatively new graphics card, and you're telling me that this game cannot run at 1080p normal settings at 60 FPS unless you turn on frame generation. That is absolutely ludicrous optimization if that's true. Now, people were already upset that games are now requiring DLSS to be enabled in order to run games at their recommended specifications. And now all of a sudden we're now including frame gen. For those who don't know, right, frame generation is basically a way for the game to artificially increase your frame rate by essentially using AI to generate frames in between the ones that your PC can render. So say that you have a game at 30 FPS, right? The game can render an extra frame in between each of your frames and basically get you, technically speaking, 60 FPS, right? But why is this game running at 30 to 40 FPS on a 4060 on normal settings? That does not sound normal at all, especially with how recent these cards are. And that doesn't even fix the main issue with frame gen, which is input latency. With frame generation, even though technically speaking you are artificially increasing the frame rate by, introducing extra frames in between, you're not really increasing the latency benefits. So basically what I'm saying is that essentially, if you're running this game at 60 FPS, even though technically speaking with frame gen you are hitting 60 FPS, this game is going to feel like 30 or 40 FPS because the input latency does not improve with extra AI generated frames, essentially. So it's going to feel like you're playing a 30 FPS game, but you're playing at 60, and that feels awful. I feel like frame generation works way better with higher frame rates, so anything above like 80 or 90, where the latency difference between two different thresholds isn't as much, but especially when you're at lower, even like below 60 FPS, it gets really noticeable, and that input latency is going to feel awful if this is true. My main question is, why are we using and relying on these AI upscaling and generation technologies to get around bad optimization? I mean, really, it's been becoming a big problem with new games that have been coming out in the past couple of months. Lots of games are demanding you to have DLSS enabled unless you have a very beefy GPU. And for the most part, these games at first glance don't look any better than some of the most beautiful games that we've seen come out in the past couple of years. Why then do we have to run these games with a DLSS or FSR enabled or with frame generation enabled just to get them in playable states, right? I mean, these cards are not old at all. The 6700 XT, the 4060, these are cards that have been released in the past couple of years. And now all of a sudden they need to have upscaling and frame generation enabled just to play these games at a playable state at 1080p no less. I'm getting really tired of these games using DLSS or frame generation as ways to bypass some optimization dev work. I mean, games like Battlefield 1 came out almost a decade ago, didn't use DLSS, but ran beautifully and for the most part looked absolutely stunning. I feel like to this day, Battlefield 1 is like a testament to how good games can look and still run great. So please, Capcom, please, I hope that this recommended spec isn't final, because if so, this is going to be an absolute shit show of a PC port. So yeah, I just wanted to rant about that for a little bit. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like. I'll definitely be testing this game when it comes out just to test performance, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Later.